Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depends upon where you are in the world. I'm the oldest guy on the Hangout. I'm Bill Gustin from Miami-Dade. I'm coming to you from the conference room of our training center. And with me is Clark Lamping from the Clark County, Las Vegas Area Fire Department, Jimmy Davis from Chicago Fire Department, Captain Mike Dugan, Mike D, from FDNY, and I don't see Jason on board or Dan Shaw, but I know that they're with us. So I don't know that they're on the screen, but that's just from my point of view. I want to give a shout out to our good friends at Key Hose. That's keyhose.com. I had an opportunity this last week to handle and see Key Hose in action, and it never disappoints. It's got a great mix of mobility with durability and kink resistant, but not excessive nozzle whip, which is a fine line, because if you got a lot of flexibility in terms of kink resistance, sometimes you do have nozzle whip. But my favorite is the True ID, but that's not what my department is using. But we're married to the Combat Ready, which is excellent hose. And as I bring up, people ask me, "Hey, Cap, why don't you guys use the True ID?" I said, "Well, we're married to the Combat Ready. You know, we made the decision. You married guys, you go out and replace your wife with a new and improved model every time one comes out? No, we've got the Combat
Bill,
Ready.
some firefighters do.
For us. So, all right, there's Dan Shaw. Dan, what's been going on in your world? How many promotions since we've had you on?
You can't resist, can you?
No, and do we have Jason?
Yeah, he's here.
Okay, I don't see him, but that's okay.
Yep, good morning. I'm here.
Okay, we're going to begin our conversation with the video Boyd Street. We are not going to critique the actions of the LA City Fire Department. It's too early and we weren't there. All I can say is two things. It is an absolute must see for every firefighter everywhere. An absolute must see. The other thing is, God bless the LA City Fire Department. There were mistakes made. They readily admit it, and they bring it to light in this video to share with the rest of the fire service in the hopes that that won't happen to any other fire department. The fire was in a commercial structure and resulted in 11 firefighters being seriously burned. Boyd Street and Peter Procchio, the man behind the curtain, I do believe you are going to put up a link, correct?
You got it, Bill.
Okay, so I'm going to turn the floor over to Clark and Jimmy Davis, and they've been on a road trip, quite a road trip across the pond. So Jimmy and Clark, can you tell us a little bit about your adventure?
Go ahead, Jimmy.
All right, I'll start off. What a very unique opportunity, you know, and I'm thinking back, this is probably the first of its kind. It was a wonderful experience, being able to compare notes, mind thoughts, different techniques, different tactics of what they're using in London, and as a matter of fact, for the entire European community out there, of how they approach water distribution, the application of water. For us, it was a great opportunity. I think Clark can agree with it. It was very humbling to get over there. We got down into the weeds. We had some pretty good at-length conversations. But also what was great about it is that we actually got to employ tactics that we use here in the States, but also get to observe and actually try them out for ourselves as some of the water application techniques that they use in Europe and in the UK in general. it was a real eye-opening experience. I think we've learned a lot from them and vice versa, that they came back and learned some things from us as well. But the good thing about this is that it's really going to spark some really good positive dialogue between us and what they're doing in Europe. I know that this is just the groundwork of possibly more things to go on and continue to build upon and also collaborate on. But it was a very exciting time for us both.
Clark, can you tell us about the facility, and then is there a difference between the way that the British operate and the way that the American Fire Service operates?
Absolutely, Cap. Absolutely, Cap. It's almost night and day. That's so different. The only thing we're still having in common is we're both using water, different quantities of water and different applications. But that's about the only thing we have in common. So the facility we're at was called the Martin and Marsh, right, Jamie? Martin and Marsh.
Martin and Marsh.
So it was, yeah, it was an Air Force base built in the 40s for World War II, and they just turned it over to the fire service. It's 400 acres of property, and they've got some heavy woods on it, and the Royal Air Force trains in that facility. We drove past, they take helicopters with cranes and they just dump helicopters in the woods, whole helicopters dumped in the woods. And that's how the Royal Air Force trains going in there and search and rescue operations. They had about, what, Jimmy, 7 burn towers, 7 huge burn towers, some of them 7, 8 stories tall, and all Class A combustibles. And they have no 1403. I asked the guy, hey, do you have to abide by 1403? And I told him, our 1403, how, I have to give the guys a walkthrough, only 5 pallets, 2 bales of straw, all this stuff. And he looked at me like, you're absolutely kidding me. How do you get anything done with that? We were on a fire, Captain Gustin. He put 30 pallets on a live burn, 30 pallets and like a whole barn full of straw on one live fire. And 7 stories up, we had pressurized smoke coming out of all the orifices on the 7th floor. And he says, all right, go get it, boys. I said, oh, shit. So, yeah, there was some of that. One fantastic facility. As far as the tactics go, not London, but the European fire brigades, no cross lays, no pre-connects. Everything is stored in rolls. They have, and I can't remember what the translation was, but it's all metric. So they have their equivalent to 1 3/4, open up compartments, and then just rows, stacks and stacks of hose on rolls. And then below that are the 2.5s, and you manually hook up and you manually unroll the hose to your destination. It works good. It's easier to deploy in the beginning, but you have to stretch it dry. And every coupling has 2 knobs on the ends, and they are on bearings, so they rotate. So you pretty much hold the knobs and you just walk, and this hose plays out as you're walking. So if you can dry stretch, you can take that upstairs, you can go down hallways, and you don't have to worry about hanging anything up. The disadvantage is those ears or those knobs on those couplings catch everything. And we were getting our asses kicked trying to pull hose upstairs, and every single step those ears would catch on stuff.
Did you spend any time on the branch?
Yes. The branch is the nozzle. Yes. And it is a high pressure, low volume nozzle. And it is set at a 30-degree fog. And their tactics are to gas cool. They want to cool the environment. And their justification is most of our buildings, most of our homes and buildings are made of stone and brick and concrete. So we don't want to put any water on the walls because it'll evaporate and it will cause an increase in heat. So they go down the hall, and as they're making the push, they put that nozzle straight up in the environment, and they give it a little pss, 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 just a mist, and then they advance and mist and advance and mist and advance. And that's how they make their way to the fire. Now, when they see the fire, I misunderstood. I thought they did all the way to the fire. As soon as they see the fire, they go straight stream and they attack the base of the fire. But the advance to the fire is low gallonage, high pressure water in the environment. And I couldn't get it to work. I was very, very uncomfortable. The training was fantastic. They said, okay, Americans, watch the Europeans fight the fire, and then Europeans, you watch the Americans. And then they split the groups in half, right? Half Americans, half Europeans, and then you do the American tactics, you do the European, and then we completely switch. The Americans use the European tactics, the Europeans use the American tactics. And I remember we were doing a live burn and I was on the outside and one of our companies was in there. And again, one of these massive, massive burns. There's a whole lumber yard on fire inside this building. And it was the American team in there. And they were flowing so much water. We had a door, one of the roll down door was there. And there was so much water hitting the door that I was standing with the European director and he says, "Are those guys okay in there? Do we need to go get them? What's going on?" And they just had that bail wide open and they were whipping it like and the water was pouring out of the bottom of the door. And this guy was actually concerned that there was a problem. I says, "No, that's how we do things." He says, "But you're wasting all that water." I says, "We're not wasting anything, boss."
Yeah, yeah. Give it a bath, man. Wall,
Yep.
ceiling, wall. Give it
And a lot of that too,
bath.
Clark, was also predicated on the container size and shape. So what they were doing in Europe is a little bit more conducive to single family or multi-dwelling compartmented units that they have. And another thing that I found very interesting too, Clark, was their building stock. After World War II, it was a very, very mad rush to get everything up and running. New construction, they had a building boom after the war. And a lot of the building techniques, because of the speed to get everything up, are somewhat questionable over there too. Not only that, you're dealing with very dangerous buildings as well.
Yeah. Did they say that 70% of London was destroyed during the war? So everything, 70% of London right now is after 1945, built after 1945.
And can I ask a question, Clark and Jimmy?
Yes, sir.
I heard from somebody I know about one of the problems they have over there is the water. And you were talking about it, but their water mains, some of their water mains are only 7 or 8 inches large in big cities. And they don't have the water like we have in Chicago, in New York, in Clark County. They don't have the water that we have. They can't get it because of the size of the mains. Did anybody talk about that?
Yes, they did. Yep, they did.
Okay.
And it's an old, I mean, how old is London? A couple thousand years old, right? So yeah, it is an old city. And crowded, a lot like New York, only much older, right? Just crowded, high density housing. And it didn't seem like, right? We were at a fire station and right next door to the fire station was this beautiful neighborhood. And the guy at the fire station, that's Leonardo DiCaprio's house right there. That's Leonardo DiCaprio's house. I said, there's a red BMW. That's his BMW right there in the driveway. And right next door, honestly, right next door was projects. There was a housing complex right next door to this beautiful neighborhood. And they're crammed in there, all sizes. None of the roads are straight. There's not a single straight road in all of London. Everything's on a curve. It's an old city.
Yeah, and there was a stone's throw from Grenfell Tower too, Clark.
Yeah, you could see from this fire station, the Paddington Fire Station, you could see the Grenfell Tower.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. I mean, they put officers of the London Fire Brigade on trial. Did they put the architect or the building code official that designed or approved that building, a multi-story, multi-family dwelling, public housing building with one friggin' stairway? What about putting them on trial? And you know, Peter, you were asking about compartmented fires. Yes, they from the research that I've done is that they fought that fire with a protect, or as they call a shelter in place strategy. But the problem was it was not a compartment fire. It was a fire scaling the outside of the building. And they still have a ton of those buildings in the UK. They've got a big problem. What are they going to do as far as replacing this or coming up with some type of automatic system that can apply water to the exterior of the building? But, and it's not just the exterior. There's an airspace in between what we call the aluminum composite panel. So they got their work cut out for them.
On that note, Cap Gustin, as far as putting those officers on trial, I have a quote here. We were speaking to officers that actually responded to Grenfell, and they said as these guys were entering the building, it would be the equivalent of assistant chief. I don't know what his title was, but the assistant chief pulled these companies in, and this is a quote from them. Today, you're going to be asked to do things that are outside of our policies and practices. I'm going to expect you to do those things. So I thought that was a hell of a quote. As these guys were entering this building, he pretty much told them, hey, go take care of business, whatever it takes.
Yeah, yeah,
And then they put them on trial when they're done.
yeah, yeah. I don't see Jason Hobelman, Chief Hobelman. And, but what's been going on in your world, in your part of the world there, Chief Hobelman? But we haven't really spoken in a while.
Not a whole lot. We're adding personnel at our place, but we've got some new subdivisions in my jurisdiction. A lot going on in the downtown area. There's a lot of talk about as it relates to commercial buildings and these high occupancy buildings of old warehouses and old AT&T building, converting those all into lofts and apartment spaces. So we're going to see high density population units downtown, not so much in my jurisdiction, but outside of that, knock on wood, been business as usual.
Well, you guys examined quite eloquently and thoroughly last month about the there's a gray line, there's not a fine line anymore between what you expect at a commercial and what you find at a residential, because people are living in the commercial buildings. And the mezzanines, and also I wanted to bring this up on behalf of Sam Hiddle, who can't be with us today, from Wichita, Kansas, that they're encountering a lot of this illegal mezzanines with people living in like commercial warehouse spaces. We're going to see more and more of this, and unfortunately, it's going to result in multiple civilian fatalities, I'm afraid, and it's only going to get worse by the day, literally by the day.
Storage sheds and storage facilities too.
Garages, I can see it here in Miami-Dade County. I can see it in my own apartment complex right now, is that there's too many cars. I talked to the property manager. He's inspecting apartments and garages. There's a bunch of cots laid out. So they got all these family members coming from all over the place, and there's not enough places to put these folks, you know. And Daryl, he's not with us today, Daryl Liggins from Oakland, but what a huge problem they have with these homeless encampments. Now, everybody in Fairfax County, because they're in the Washington Beltway, is rich. So I don't think that they have any problem in Fairfax County. So, which I know is not the truth. Chief Dan, you have any comments as far as finding residential occupancies inside of what you would expect to be commercials?
Yeah, I mean, I'm well aware we're the Gold Coast, right? But you know, at the end of the day, we have 1.4 million people who are jammed into our county. And they have to live somewhere, and that population just continues to increase. And we saw a downtick in calls during COVID, where more people were home. Obviously, more calls, but you know, we're cresting over probably 120,000 for this year, and all that means that more and more people are coming into that region, and more people are coming into this area that aren't all the people who have boatloads of money and live in DC or work in DC. And the county continues to really work towards initiatives to have affordable housing. But, you know, in the interim, to get to that point, you know, in our poor areas that we see some of these issues is exactly what I think Jason was talking about. We had self-storage facilities where, hey, I can't rent out my self-storage facility. But if there is a group of people who are down on their luck, and for $20 a month, I'll stretch an extension cord into that self-storage facility, and you can live in there with your family. You know, the McMansions, you know, when that got discovered really in our area, really where that came from, the code enforcement was that we were finding was that people were building these large homes, and it was citizens that were calling in saying like, look, they were using the bathroom outside because there was enough bathrooms inside the house. So code enforcement, we run a call there, and you find that the house has a lock on every single door. and they're all single room occupancies inside this large structure to pay for the rent of it. So yeah, I mean, you see it in every place. I mean, it tends to be, unfortunately, a socioeconomic issue. But you know, the more and more we see is that, especially in a downturn of the economy, you know, people have to make money, and they'll do it any means possible. And typically they're not, I mean, we always see it in residential, and Doug and I always talk about this in our, with 25 to Survive, is like, you know, in the commercial occupancy, you're getting inspected, but the residential, you build your house, no one's coming to inspect your house again. So
That's a
whether it's
doctrine.
you turn your garage into an occupancy and you hang an AC unit at the front of it, or you make single room occupancies in your basement or any other rooms, you know, no one's going to find out until something bad typically happens.
Yeah, and Jimmy, you were mentioning about security. 1980, 81, we get a fire in a paint and body shop. And this is back where it was so crazy. Man, when you're young and stupid, well, now I'm old and stupid, but when I was young and stupid, you have no fear. So we would cut a small triangle that today we would reach in and pull the latch of a sectional overhead door. Not back then. We cut a hole just big enough and dive in there. So now if something starts blowing up in there, I don't know if we're going to be gentlemen taking our turns getting out. My point is, grandpa or an uncle just came over from Cuba and stuck a friggin' shotgun right in our face. And he didn't know what the bomberos looked like. All he could figure out is he woke up and there's guys busting in his place. Never mind, it was full of smoke. So I think that's the closest. I've been, and one other time, we woke up a guy that was buck naked and he left something on the stove, nakeder than a jaybird with an automatic and pointing it right at us. So we've had our times, but Jimmy, your point well taken about the security. Mike, Captain Mike, how about taxpayers, and have you ever had a report from a living unit above a taxpayer where the fire actually originated in the business that was closed during the evening?
More than once, Bill. More than once it has happened. I was when I was a lieutenant, Chief DiBernardo, Joey D's dad, was the division chief, and we had a report of a woman who owned a bakery, and it was a strip mall. And she put an attic, a hatchway up into the truss space and put plywood up there on the trusses, had a bed, a couch, a TV, and all this stuff. And if she was closing that night and then opening the next morning, she would just sleep there. Well, we had a rip roaring. It was a third alarm in the taxpayers. And somebody said, that's her car. So we had to go in there and make a push, and it was running the cop loft already. We got up there, we could see there was a couch up there, but it was already burning and everything else. And it turned out she wasn't there. Her car wasn't running. We didn't know that. And she took the subway home. But that happened in a couple of Chinese food places. And again, these are people living the American dream, immigrants coming over. They pay rent to a Chinese store. I had one when I was in Spanish Harlem as a fireman, where they were the first floor commercial occupancy, and there was a vacant building above it. In the back of the Chinese food place, they put a spiral ladder, left all of the windows looked like a vacant, and they built a little residence for themselves upstairs. But the only way to get into this was through the back of the Chinese place, up these spiral stairs. And we had a job in there. And what we found out was we looked at off the fire escape, one of the windows had an air conditioner sticking out of it in a vacant building. And, you know, as a young fireman, that didn't compute. And then when we found all of this stuff, we were like, oh my God. I mean, we were lucky we didn't lose a family of 8, you know? So you see this in people. We also see this, when I was a captain, we had a grocery store that, again, they're in a socioeconomically depressed area, and they're losing a lot of money to pilferage. So they're trying to figure out a way to make money. up the stairs where they stored all of the dry goods up there. You went up the stairs, turned to the right, and went down a dead-end hallway. They put in 5 apartments. They were going to rent them to their employees. There was no secondary means of egress. There was no COs. There was nothing. And they were going to just rent these to their employees as part of their compensation, but then also keep people living in there, keep them, it's like working for the company store in the old days. They were going to do this. So yes, you see this all over, and it can be in any kind of place where people are living. If somebody has a store in a area that has a crime problem, a lot of times you'll see people sleeping in the store overnight just to protect their goods. We had a couple of drugstores in the areas that I worked in where they put 1/4-inch steel plating on the roof because people were cutting the roofs and dropping little kids in to steal the drugs and the stuff and the beauty supplies. So they now put steel plates on the roof. Well, does that change the building? And again, never, ever did you ever hear of it being, that an architect certified that all of these roof joists were capable of holding all of this weight or anything else. And they just put this up there, welded it on the roof, and there you go, tarred over it, and we're set to go.
Mike, twice in my career, I've encountered booby-trapped back doors of businesses that are electrified. When the guy closes up at night, he just plugs in the burglar bars and the doors. And for his protection, it's just about the halfway mark here. I want to give another shout out to our friends at Key Hose. 2 of them, primarily Dave Hibben, former lead of DC Engine 10, one of the busiest companies in the world, and Mark Lighthill, both fine gentlemen from Key. When you buy Key products, you get the whole reputation of the company with you. And the salespeople are not just salesmen; they're firemen. They're firemen, firefighters. They're firefighters. Mike, one of the most humiliating mistakes I ever made is I went to a fire and a taxpayer, grocery store, barber shop, that type of stuff. Rolled down shutters in the evening, everything locked up with the American 2000 hockey pucks. And I made the critical mistake of allowing a civilian to do my size up for me. He called in for smoke on the 2nd floor. And like a knucklehead, we took a line up there. And well, you know where the fire was. Now, my chief at the time had been he volunteered to do another tour in Vietnam. He was God rest his soul, the Lord took him too early. He was a Marine in Vietnam. And after that humiliating mistake, you know what he said to me? Nothing. He said nothing because he knew that no one is going to make me feel worse, and no one is going to make me more humiliated than I am right now. I made a terrible mistake. I let a civilian lure me upstairs to do a size up when in fact the fire was in the grocery market. And then you talk about egg. I had enough egg on my face to make a friggin' omelet, for God's sake.
Bill, the other thing I want to just say about that is
Yeah.
a couple of times in my career, we had roll downs pulled down, but no locks. They locked them from the inside, and they locked employees in there in restaurants and things like that. And there were guys in there, and we had a smoke condition showing from this place, and we can see the guys inside. And we ended up having to cut the roll downs because they wouldn't open up the door, because they were told if they opened up the door before 8 a.m. when the company or whatever it was, they would get fired. Well, we cut the roll downs. But one of the things that I learned in that one is in your size up, look at the locks and make sure they're locked from the outside. Because if they're locked from the inside and you can't see the locks on the outside, it means somebody's in that store.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. And I think security measures are only going to get more serious instead of less serious in our line of work. Chief Jason, are you seeing an increase in security measures being taken? I mean, you're about as middle America as anybody could be, maybe the heartland, if you want to call it that. Are you seeing a change in demographics and a change in occupancy in your area?
Oh, all the above. Yeah, we're an older community. And so we're seeing a lot of security measures with, things as simple as bakeries to, any occupancy in a strip mall, all the way up to dealerships, apartment complexes and buildings, where you used to be able to get into that foyer pretty easily is now much more difficult to access the multiple, occupied units in those buildings. And residential occupancies we're seeing a lot more and heavier and more security on what used to be just regular residential front door locks. We're seeing heavier enforcements on those as well. And demographics are changing. Our population pretty much stayed the same. Our call volume has gone up the last 6 years, about 5% a year, without a change in population. So we're seeing a lot of those challenges, and especially on the change of occupancies. And now that we've got some of these dispensaries coming in, Missouri just voted to legalize recreational marijuana. We don't have a lot yet, but our neighbors have some, and they are seeing significant issues in those dispensaries that are in place and the surrounding properties.
Yeah. Well, there's your Boyd Street. Before we let Dan take the floor, our friend Dave McGrail, I said, well, and Dave is disgusted with the marijuana situation in Colorado. I said, but at least you don't have the surreptitious grow houses like you used to have. He says, are you kidding me? They're worse than ever. They're worse than ever. So, yeah, you will see an uptick in it. Dan, go ahead with your size up observation, please.
No, you made an excellent point from your experience, right? And I think the critical thing we see when we look at line of duty deaths and close calls is that every 63 seconds in the United States, we go to a residential building fire. So it's very easy for us to fall into the complacency of operating like we're at a residential building fire every time we go out the door. And we don't make that transition to when we operate in a commercial building. And some of that, we have to make that change. And it has to be individual, has to be the apparatus operator, has to be the captain, lieutenant, the chief coming down the road to make that switch and recognize that red flag that we're going down that path. And the clearest example for us that we've learned a lesson from is our algorithm is the same for all occupancies: 4 engines, 2 trucks, a rescue company, 2 battalions, 2 EMS units. And the reason we get that compliment is for, obviously for fighting fire and to be able to have the resources available. But for each occupancy type, they have different assignments. And so for the strip shopping center, we know every single time the 3rd due engine, the 2nd due truck, unless it's a tower, and the rescue company go to Side Charlie. That is our primary assignment where they go. And it's the only occupancy we have where, when our people are required to take a lap before they enter the structure, not the physical feat of seeing if they can run around a building, but to take a lap, make an assessment, be able to look at all those 4 sides of the structure and to deliver, sound tactical decision-making about what they're going to do based upon what they see, i.e. the location of fire, potential victims. In the residential application, we really care about 5 sides of that box, right? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and a basement. We don't really care about the roof. I mean, we're on the East Coast. We don't do a lot of vertical ventilation on peaked roof residential. It's not our gig. We don't dedicate companies up there unless it's a specific need of a knee wall or some other reason. But in a commercial building, we require a roof report. So we're telling you, you must go to the roof. So if you don't make that transition from a residential to commercial, then you're missing a major part of the size up. Like, we want that truck to get to that roof and they got to report back to the chief 5 key things that they're supposed to report back on by default. Where's the location of volume of the smoke or fire? Is there any exposure concerns, i.e. is there walls? What's the loading up on the roof? Is there HVAC units, other things up there? Do you see any evidence of a cockcloth fire or anything that's burning in there, with the bubbling tar or the snow that is not, present at one spot? And then what roof construction hazards do you see? Parapet, change of roof lines, false fronts, whatever it is. They're required to report that back out to the incident commander. So we're making that hard transition to say, we're not a residential building. We have to make that change in our size up on our operations. We know it's going to be more arduous to get into the side Charlie. So that's why we put the rescue company back there to assist with the engine or with the truck. We put the engine back there because we might need a line up on the roof. It'll be much easier to take that line over the roof when it's flat on the backside, not a parapet on the front side. So I think when people look at the history of our fire service and look at line of duty deaths, we don't have a whole lot of those in commercial buildings, but when we do, it's a lot of people.
Clark, I think you had a statistic on that, didn't you? You're muted, Clark.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's an old statistic, and I teach big box fires at my officer candidate school in my agency. There's an old quote from statistic from Vincent Dunn. He says we lose 4 firefighters for 100,000 residential building structures, but we lose 9 firefighters for every 100,000 commercial structure fires. Now we lose more firefighters in residential because that's what we do more. But typically when we have our multiple line of duty deaths, it's going to be in the commercial buildings. We're losing more than 1 firefighter at a time.
And the history is telling us, right? I mean, everyone knows the Worcester 6, right? The Charleston 9. Like we have stickers to tell us that. But remember these guys and girls who die in these line of duty deaths, and many times it's that. And Clark, I think you had asked a question about the truck, right? Where's the first truck to go?
Right.
For us, the way we operate is if we have we're fortunate. We have a pretty equal distribution of towers and trucks. Most metro jurisdictions don't. So it's pretty common for us to get a tower and a straight truck on a box or a tiller, one of those combinations. And the reason we make that delineation is if we have a tower on the box, and because most of our apparatus can get to a box within 6 to 8 minutes, we want the tower to always be on side alpha in the front of the building, because they have the ability to go down below grade to be able to flow up to 2,000 gallons of water into that fire and not be wasted on side Charlie if we needed that. So if a straight truck and a tower on a box, the straight truck will go to the rear, the tower will go to the front. But if it's 2 straight trucks and a tiller or just a rear mount, then they'll first goes to the front, second goes to the rear.
I got a question for the chiefs, both Dan and Jason. As a chief arriving, you're not first year. How often have you had to change the game plan? How often have you had to hurt somebody's feelings or bruise somebody's ego and change the strategy and tactics once you arrived on the scene based upon your size up?
More than once.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, people's feelings are really unimportant on fire. I'd rather you be angry at me and you're alive to be angry at me because we got you that you excited for doing something. And it really goes back to our role, right? I mean, every person's role is different when they're coming in there, whether you're the first chief or the second chief, or for us, the ops deputies coming in. We all have to have each other's backs. And we all understand that you're under an enormous amount of stress when you first arrive. And that if I'm listening to something and something doesn't sound right, I'm recognizing a red flag, man, you must intervene. You don't have to micromanage from the street, but you better intervene, because you're going to feel terrible if you didn't say anything and they make a bad decision and you had that information to give a little tickle to say, hey, did we get a roof report yet before you commit in there? I mean, just something simple of that nature.
I agree with Dan. As a chief coming in, we have a luxury of hearing the initial radio traffic and how things are progressing and knowing the buildings. And then when you get there, you're looking at things from a more broad perspective and from a distance, which allows you to change things sometimes. It's not necessarily what they did in the initial attack was wrong, but now what you see, you may need to redeploy to a different position or change just a master stream for 30 or 45 seconds. And then seeing what you've got on the inside to knock down the bulk of that fire, or, checking an adjacent part of the building. I think Dan's right. We just had the luxury of coming in at a different time of the incident, but you have to make those decisions. That's what you get paid for. And I'm with Dan. I'd rather be mad than not there anymore. And most of the time, they get it. They get it, and they give you a hard time for the rest of your career for pulling somebody out or changing something, and I'll deal with that.
Very honestly, but Bill, just two things, please. First off, on our commercial fires, when we have commercial fires that go bad, we end up naming them. Boyd Street, Worcester, Cold Storage Warehouse, the Mary Pang fire, the Wall Bombs fire, Hackensack Ford. I can go on and on and on and on. The other thing is the Chiefs, they're seeing the total picture. I was a captain. I'm in there fighting the fire. Look at one of my heroes, the guy from Worcester, Mike McNamee, who stopped more guys from going up those stairs. I mean, he had people hated him. And it took almost a year for the last guy to show up and apologize to him. But they were like, you are a coward. You are all it is. He probably saved 10 to 12 more lives in that building. And again, we do this, okay? We have to remember, we have to delineate between these things, what we are fighting and what we are dealing with, okay? Because it's going to happen. These commercial fires, when they go bad, and it snowballs. And it just gets worse and worse for us. And very honestly, as the chief, and I was never a chief, but I ABC'd, acted as a battalion chief a couple of times on commercial fires. There is nothing more scary to me than having 3 or 4 companies in a building that's on fire and you can't yourself see the whole thing. That's why the communications and the reports from the roof, Side Charlie, or Exposure 3, whatever you want to call it, you gotta get those reports. And if you're not getting them, you have to ask what's going on back there.
Mike, I watched a video from FDNY, and frankly, I was surprised. The chief ordered the companies out. We're going to change everybody back out. We're going to change to a defensive exterior attack. Almost every company that he ordered out replied with a dissertation of why they should remain in the building and that they're making great headway. And
2 more
eventually,
minutes. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Chief Shaw, let me ask you.
Can I just
We
say one
almost
thing,
got it,
Bill?
Chief.
One thing on that. Just one thing. I'm sorry.
Go
As a
ahead.
young fireman, I went to a fire and the chief orders us out of the building, and it was on a street that went up, and the buildings were built next to each other, but each building next door was about a half a story up because it was on a hill in Manhattan. And I went to this fire and it was in a vacant, and we had it one more room to go. And we gave the dissertation and we were like, oh man, we got this. What is he doing? This clipboard carrying, fire fearing, doesn't want us in the building. We walked outside and we were getting ready to say something to the chief. And I looked at the car and the car was glowing red. I looked around, it was a 5th alarm. Fire was in every building up the hill. Okay, that's it. The whole thing's going to come down. Okay, and as that moth to the light, I was as a fireman, the chief taught me a valuable lesson. He's seeing something that you're not seeing from the inside. There was fire on every floor of the building we were in. There's not one more room. There's about 70 more rooms to get. There's not 2 more minutes. There's 2 more days for this fire. Okay, that's why you have to get out when you're ordered out.
Mike, actually, the last transmission from the chief was negative. The order has been issued. Back out. You're not seeing what I'm seeing. And the other thing is, let's ask the chiefs here, Chief Dan and Chief Jason. We almost got it, Chief, or we're almost there. In terms of time, we almost got it. We're almost there. What is that? Is that 2 minutes? Is that 10 minutes? Is that 2 hours? how in the increments of time, we're almost there. How much time does that take?
I mean, you go back to like, I think it's two key elements, right? I appreciate anyone who would say that, right? I appreciate someone who is disciplined, but any fire I would go to, I much rather have a yoked lion than a belligerent donkey. I want someone who's going to be aggressive and wants to do it and they want to do their task, but it has to come with trust. And the reason that I'm in that role, not me, but there's a chief who's in this role, is to have your back, not be consumed in zero visibility, the impacts of heat and stress, looking at structure saying, I appreciate that, but you need to get out now. And I can't remember where I read it, but it was something that said something to the effect of your stomach lining has over 100,000 neurons, more than a dog's brain does. So when your gut's telling you something, it's telling you something. And it's probably too late. But that time frame is, I think, and I'm not putting words in Jason's mouth, I think we all struggle with that, because I remember being at the end of that hose line and wanting that sense of accomplishment that I've been put here for a task. I don't want to have a defeatist attitude. We got to put this fire out.
Chief,
But I'm going to have the trust in the chief because we train, we have good doctrine, that when he says get out, there's a reason he's telling me to get out. It means get out now.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. It's not always necessarily a time issue. It's not always about one crew or company either. It may be that all the other operations that are supporting the attack are not going well, and there's some chaos that needs to be cleaned up and order restored. And so there's a lot of factors that go into, number one, there's a difference between backing out and regrouping than abandoning the situation and the call. Sometimes something needs to be just changed a little bit, and you redeploy and you calm, as Chief Castros would say, you calm that chaos. But the other thing to think about is that guys on the line aren't thinking about is work times. They don't realize that the work cycle's been as long as it is. There's a lot of things that, and we're not making progress at the same time. And so, I think Dan hit it on the head with, when you look at what you're trying to accomplish, it's not necessarily always like a time in minutes and seconds. It's what's happening and what's not happening, and making that decision to adjust. And I think it's just, I've done it more at residential buildings than I have at commercial buildings, to be quite honest, simply because we go to more of those fires. But because sometimes the initial deployment, especially when you're working with mutual aid companies, is not always in concert. And you can waste a lot of time and resources getting nothing done when that's happening, as opposed to saying, hey, everybody, let's take 3 steps back and let's restart, attack, roof, ventilation, search, all those things, and let's get it right.
I think you're hitting one key important part of that, Jason, that I think many overlook, is that it's not always the changing fire conditions that warrants it. It's, as a later arriving chief, as an ops deputy, it was a lack of accountability. If you had no idea where anyone was inside this building with a fire that you don't know where the location is, the answer is not to put more people in the building. So sometimes you might do this orderly withdrawal or an evacuation and say, wait a minute, we screw the pooch in the first 5 minutes. We're going to reset, reassess, and reattack this. But I have no idea where anyone is.
100%.
Or you got to put the
two lines going into a building and both are asking for more line. It's just these little things you got to be paying attention to.
Yeah, red flags, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Captain Mike, I know we've had this discussion before. On the FDNY, is there a maximum amount of hose line that can be extended into a commercial occupancy before you have to find another way in? Like, for instance, the fire is 200 feet from the side 1, and it's 50 feet from the side 3, even though it's going to be side 3 is locked up like Fort Knox. Do you have some kind of written or unwritten policy on that in the FDNY?
Not on a commercial. On a residential, they say how many lines can be stretched up the interior stairs. Okay, and they don't let you take too many up the interior stairs. It's usually 2 lines, and the other line's got to come from another location. Now, sometimes depending on the fire, the cop loft, how many apartments on the top floor, they will vary on that. If there are multiple staircases to take occupants out and all of that other stuff. But not in a commercial. It's up. That's why the chief is there. It's up to the chief to look at this whole thing and see where that line is going, where that fire is. And let's be honest, if it's a 200-foot deep building and we're 150 feet in, okay, and stuff goes wrong fast. Look at the Charleston, the super sofa, okay? They didn't get out. I mean, you have to look at all of these things, and that's why we want a chief. And I'm going to also just throw one other thing that I think is vitally important. A dear friend of mine, chief in the New York City Fire Department, Johnny Newell. Johnny Newell was a chief up in Harlem, and they went to a fire, and it was in a vacant building, but it had a sidewalk shed around it, so they couldn't pick up the address right away. And Johnny said to his chauffeur, to his driver, his aide, get the address of this building. And the guy went up and looked and finally found the address, because the sidewalk shed around the whole building that they were going to do construction had blocked the address. And they gave the address to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher said, be advised, there's SIDS, Critical Information Dispatch System, SIDS on this building. And it says no interior operations at all. And the guys are already in the building, 2 handlines. Okay. And Johnny said, Mayday, Mayday, everybody out of the building now. Drop your hose lines, leave your tools, and get the hell out of the building. They were out of the building with the line still in there, less than a minute, and the whole thing pancaked in the interior. And we could have lost 3 companies, easy, in that building, okay? If you have any kind of critical information, put that stuff in your dispatch notes and make sure you verify the address of these buildings, what you have in there. And my last point on this is, and again, he's a friend of mine also, Mike McNamee from Worcester, Massachusetts, who was one of my heroes who stopped those guys up there. He said after the fire, you know, I always was worried about having a fire in that building. If you have a building in your response district that you are worried about having a fire in, you should be drilling on that building no less than twice a month with every shift in your company, every shift that responds to that. If this is something that scares you, there's a reason. As Dan said, those neurons, if this scares you, there's a reason. Get out there and plan it, drill on it. Everyone should know that building and know what is expected of them at that building.
Captain Mike, I wonder how many firefighters' lives have been saved by a fire officer saying something just wasn't right. Something just wasn't right. This is mentioned in the Boyd Street video, which again, I'm going to strongly recommend. The link will be up. If you have not seen it, you owe it to yourselves, your family, and your department to see it. But I really wonder, it's kind of a rhetorical question. How many lives have been saved because something just didn't seem right?
I have to think thousands and thousands of firefighters' life. That voice that Dan Shaw talked about, that you talked about, that voice is in there for one reason and one reason only. And that reason is to keep you alive. Okay? If it says we don't belong here, there's a reason that that voice is telling you we don't belong here.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're going to wrap this up here pretty soon. Any final thoughts, Chief Jason, on this topic? Something just don't feel right.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Dan. And I've learned over the years that, you know, that those neurons are a combination of your education, your experience, the stories you've heard, your all the things that you've done yourself and vicariously through others. And it usually doesn't happen to tell you to do things that are right or that are going well. It always speaks up when things are a little chaotic and things don't seem to be going so great. So to me, it's always been a really important cue. And I think Mike and Dan made some really fantastic points on that.
Yeah, Jimmy, something just isn't right. For instance, you would expect if it's a kitchen fire in a single family house that the company would get the door forced and you would start to see smoke change into steam within 2-3 minutes. Okay. If it doesn't happen, something ain't right. The chief that, God rest his soul, Chief Stevens, pulled us out of our house. Chief, why'd you pull us out? It's a 1,200 square foot house. I got two of my best companies and you can't find the fire. Well, right after he says that, the entire first floor collapsed into the basement. We didn't even know there was a basement. Did he know there was a basement? No, but he knew that something wasn't right. I want to say a big thank you to Key. That's keyhose.com. Don't go cheap on your hose. It's truly your lifeline. We definitely are going to go on this topic again next month. But we've got some other business to take care of here. I understand we have a birthday boy in our midst today. Yes, a birthday boy. Thank God he is not wearing, he did not appear in his birthday suit for the hangout, because it would not be a pretty sight. So how old are you, Clark?
32 today.
And I heard that from my daughter, Renee. 32, you're older than 32.
Closer to 52, probably.
52, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Well, you know, it's that
Give or
strain
take a
of
score.
command.
Yeah. I don't feel a day over 60.
All right, my brother.
Give or take a decade,
Come
you
on
know?
in. Come in. Uh-oh. Come on in.
Clark, you've been saying 32 for years.
Yeah, since I
Hold
was
on a minute here. I
22.
want to introduce you to somebody. Nikki, Captain Nikki, come on up. Say hello to everybody.
Hello,
Captain
everybody.
Nikki, I
Hello.
worked with her dad, Willie Lattimore, was the best senior firefighter, doorman firefighter I ever had. Hey, how are you, sir?
Oh, yes, I'm Stefan from Grenfell Safety.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here to meet you.
So you're just saying hello to everybody's, the nation's fire service? Oh, Chief Burt, Chief Burt, that's Clark. Wish him a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody. Hey, everybody, have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and God bless you all and keep you safe in our most noble profession. See you next month. We'll continue with the commercials.